unleavened yarmulke. I can't show you the rest. No, I'm kidding. I'm sure they make that, but I don't have any. And this is what bread would look like if it was missing a whole lot of love. You guys ever make your own bread? You know there's a lot of work goes into that. But if you don't have the time and all you have is flour and water and you throw it right in the oven, you get something similar to matzah. We actually made matzah this year with our Hebrew school kids, and it came out interesting, is the way I'd put that. The reason for that is the biblical story of Passover teaches that the night of the Exodus, the day of the Exodus, we left in such a big hurry, people didn't have time for their bread to rise. Bread is just flour and water, and if you leave it sit out, what happens? The naturally occurring yeast is going to get into it, it's going to do its thing, it's going to start to ferment, it's going to rise, and you put it in the oven, you get a nice roll or a loaf of bread or something. But if you apply heat to it before that happens, you get a cracker, pretty much. And that is the food that we base everything on for this 8-day holiday every year. So for this week, you guys are familiar with Lent, you've heard of that? You give up something. We gave up basically bread and cookies and cakes, donuts, rolls, pasta. I'm not bitter at all. There have been some approximations. You can do some things with matzah. You can make a flourless cake. You can make matzah meal, which is cooked matzah already, and you grind it up again to make a flour a second time. You can make that into cakes and cookies. They're not great. They can make noodles out of potato flour or tapioca starch instead of the wheat. That way you're not violating the holiday. They're not great. Anything that says gluten-free, by the way, is usually good for Passover. So this is where we turn to a lot of those things. Somebody said matzah brai in the back, right? That is basically a frittata made with matzah and eggs, and then you can have it savory or sweet. Some people like it with sugar on top, and you get the sweet or whipped cream. I'm a savory kind of guy. I like to actually put chive cream cheese on top of that, and it comes out really amazing. It's chewy instead of crunchy and crackery. All of this is happening because of the story in the Torah, in the Bible. It goes back to the book of Exodus. We're familiar with the basics of the story. Let my people go, no plagues, bad things happening. Moses is there to try to convince Pharaoh to let the people go. He says no. The 10 plagues occur, and we flee in a big hurry. Finally, in the night of the 10th plague, the firstborn are all being smitten. Pharaoh has had enough, and he says, get out, take the people, go, I don't want to see you ever again. And he changes his mind real quick, chasing us down at the Sea of Reeds, at which point we know the miracle of the sea splitting, the Israelites cross on dry land, the sea goes back, takes care of the Egyptians, and at that moment, the Jewish people became the Jewish people at that moment. On the Jewish calendar, the month that has Passover is considered January 1. It's really more like July 4th, though. You know, we change the calendar year, January 1, but we celebrate our country on July 4th. Imagine if those were flipped. It would be a little weird, wouldn't it? We count down to midnight for Independence Day. So Passover is the Independence Day of the Jewish nation. It's the first time that they were free, no longer slaves, ready to rule their own destiny, as it were. There are a lot of bumps along the way. There's a whole Bible about it. But the commandments of this day are that we need to remember it. And how do we remember it? We eat what the slaves ate. We eat the food of affliction, it's called. So the main reason given that we have matzah is because we left in such a hurry that the bread couldn't rise. But that's not the whole story. The bread will rise, by the way, in 18 minutes. That's a really short time span. We left so quick. We were right in the middle of making bread. We had to leave just not even 18 minutes went by before the sun hits that dough and turns it into matzah. There's also the problem of we might have left at night, in which case I don't think the moon baked anything into matzah. The second part of the story is this is what the slaves ate. They didn't have the freedom to sit down and have a lunch break. They were given barley flour, which was the cheapest ingredient you could find. It's what they gave to the animals for animal feed. That's what they gave to the Israelite slaves. That plus water, plus rolling it out, makes matzah. If you don't have a lot of time because you're not allowed to have a lunch break, that's going to be your bread every day. So it not only reminds us of the freedom, but it also is a reminder of what we went through before we had that freedom. We are also commanded to tell the story. Back in the day, it was up to each household leader, the father of the house usually, to tell everyone in the house the story, to retell it. No matter how old they were, how wise they were, how learned they were, every person had an obligation to tell the story. But how do you tell the story? What elements do you focus on? What are the important bits? Well, over time, the rabbis developed an order to how this night should go. And it's called a Seder, which you may have heard that word. And the Hebrew word Seder literally means order. It's just the script for the night. Do these things in this way, in this order. And then as that evolved, we got books, like this new edition from Maxwell House. How did a coffee company become the world's preeminent producer of Passover liturgy materials? And they come out with a new one every year, and the text hasn't changed in almost 2,000 years. So I don't know what they're updating. Maybe the English side, maybe the pictures. So funny story, how did this come to be? Well, before this, you might have had a fancy book like this one that I have. This is for my own personal collection. This is just a nicely illustrated and written same material. The Hebrew, the English, it's all the same with the instructions for how to conduct the Seder. And it sort of resembles a matzah a little bit, the oval shape. You could use your imagination. Maybe some houses had that, maybe some didn't. In 1920s New York City, a lot of houses did not. Also, coffee was not yet certified kosher for Passover, which is kind of a laugh because it's an agricultural product. It's not even a bean, it's a berry. So there's nothing about coffee that would render it no good for Passover, but everybody was looking for the package to be marked kosher for Passover with a symbol of some kind. So Maxwell House got smart, realized every year all the coffee companies had to put away all their stock and get rid of it and switch everyone to tea. That's what they drank for the week, because there was no question that tea was kosher for Passover. It's a leaf. What's wrong with that? It's not bread. Maxwell House got smart, hired a rabbi and said, would you come and inspect our facilities and give it your okay? And he said, it's coffee. What would be bad about coffee? Just come do it. We'll pay you. The rabbi came in. They became the first coffee company to be marked kosher for Passover and sold out. Everybody was so happy that coffee was back on the menu. The other coffee companies, I imagine like Chock full of nuts and all those other places, they figured this out too. So how am I going to differentiate myself from the competition? I know every family needs one of these little pamphlets the night of the Seder. We'll give one out every time you buy a can of our coffee. It was a brilliant idea in 1932, and ever since, for over 90 years, Maxwell House has been putting this out every year. They no longer check if you buy the coffee. In fact, I don't even know if they care if you buy the coffee. If you go to your local supermarket, you'll find a stand with these, with the Maxwell House brand, and it tells you all about how to set up the Seder plate, what to do before the holiday, the prayers in Hebrew and English in the right order, with stories and illustrations. Any of these would be kosher for Passover to use. They have the required things. Elements like talk about why we eat matzah, talk about why we eat bitter herbs, we eat this ritual food, and we eat it in this order. All of those instructions are in there. The beauty of it is you can go beyond that, and there are almost no limits. This is one of my favorites to show off. This is the Passover graphic novel Haggadah. It is kosher in that all the Hebrew that you need is in here, the instructions and the rituals in the right order, but it's in a comic book format. So if you have teenagers, for example, and you try to engage the kids, it tells the story of Passover as if it were a superhero movie. A lot of folks have tried to come up with a version of the Haggadah that was a little more fanciful, like this one here from Seinfeld. It's the unofficial Haggadah about nothing. And it has all kinds of different translations and lines of dialogue that as if they were in the show kind of thing. You can have Newman saying stuff and Seinfeld saying things. So if you're a fan of the show, this is a cute one. I picked this one up this year. Any Star Trek fans here, at least familiar with the universe? This is the first ever Klingon Haggadah. Didn't know Klingons celebrated Passover? Now you do. They like stuff about warriors and battles, so that's what the focus is there. There are all kinds of ones. I saw there's an office-based Haggadah, but there's also, on a more serious note, different interpretive ones. There's an environmentalist one that focuses on climate change in the world we're in. There's a feminist Haggadah that focuses on women's roles. So you can get one in virtually any style, the core of it's going to be the same. What is that core? The core is that we need to tell the story of Passover. Why is this night different? Why do we sit around a table, eat strange foods, and do strange things? So we retell the story of the Exodus, and we do that, as we do most things in Judaism, with food. Because if there's food involved, every Jewish holiday, by the way, is about food or not eating. It's only one or the other. It's feast or famine, literally. This is the Seder plate that contains most of the symbolic items that are used during the Seder. And this too is open to all kinds of customization. I have a Lennox one at home that was given as a wedding gift that we use, my wife and I. This is the one we use at TBS. You could get virtually any one that you like. There's no requirement that they do anything except hold the items that you're going to be talking about. Now, what are those items? We have a roasted egg. This represents one of the sacrifices that were brought. Passover used to be celebrated very differently from how we do it today. Every family needed to bring a lamb and a second sacrifice, usually a grain offering, because it was a festival. And then that was their dinner. You had lamb on Passover every year because that was your sacrifice. We don't have that anymore. We don't have a holy temple. We don't sacrifice animals. So we have two places on here. We have the shank bone and the egg representing the sacrifices that the families brought, which also freed us up to have something that wasn't lamb for dinner, like a nice brisket or some chicken or something. Or if you're a vegan, not a whole lot. This is a tough holiday to be a vegan. I'll get into that in a minute. All right. Other things we have here are the bitter herbs. That one's a biblical commandment. You need to eat that Passover offering with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. So what's a bitter herb? What would you use, Rini?
Oh, you're asking me.
I'm asking you. What's your favorite bitter herb?
Horseradish.
Horseradish is a popular one, but it's not the only one.
Horseradish?
Horseradish, yeah. I mean,
Parsley.
Parsley is not bitter enough. That gets placed at a different spot. Romaine lettuce down near the bottom, where the white crunchy parts are,
Yeah.
the romaine lettuce, that's considered a bitter herb. I've seen people use that. It's a little easier to dip that in the charoset and the salt water and whatnot than it is to dip a horseradish. Nobody's grabbing a horseradish and just chowing down on it.
Oh, yeah.
Probably put you in the hospital.
Oh, yeah.
We also have some greens. That's where the parsley comes in, or some kind of lettuce representing springtime. It is a spring holiday. There's the maror. It says horseradish on here, but it can be any bitter herb. I've seen scallions used as well, green onions. And in fact, the Jews of Persia have an interesting custom. When they tell the story of slavery in Egypt, they use those scallions to whip each other. Could you imagine being invited to that dinner and not knowing this in advance? At some point during the dinner, we're just going to smack each other with green onions? Okay. Haven't been to a Persian Seder, but that's what I'm doing. And then my favorite part, the charoset, which is a mixture of chopped apples, walnuts, and wine or grape juice. And it's supposed to represent mortar that was used to make the bricks that the slaves built all these things for Pharaoh. They had to make a lot of that. That actually is not just symbolic, but every good Seder host will make an extra batch because people will be snacking on it the rest of the night. It's delicious. Apples, walnuts, and wine. It sounds just as tasty as you can imagine. These two symbols don't go on the plate. This is the cup of Elijah. Elijah the prophet is said to be the harbinger or the forebearer of the Messiah. So if Elijah shows up at your Seder, it's good news. So we want Elijah to show up. If Elijah shows up, the Messiah is on the way, the world's going to get fixed and perfected, and boy, the world could be fixed, right? So we want to entice Elijah to show up, and we want to make sure we're a good host in case he does, so we always put a cup of wine out for him. As a little tradition, the host always tries to make the wine disappear at some point during the night. Because during the second half of the Seder, after the dinner, there's a point in which we open the front door of our homes to welcome in Elijah. So it's always fun if, while the kids are occupied looking over there, you dump out the wine, and then, look, he came. His wine's gone. And the kids are always blown away. They were looking, they couldn't see him. And then this cup is a new innovation. This is the cup of Miriam. So including women in the Seder, Miriam is associated with water. She saw to it that baby Moses was put into the water. She witnessed it when the Pharaoh's daughter pulled him out of the water. She stayed around to make sure he was okay. She led the women in song and dance after we crossed the sea. Once again, water. And as long as Miriam was alive during those 40 years in the desert, everywhere the Israelites went, there was a well that followed Miriam. So they always had access to fresh water. And as soon as she died, that went away. So what do we fill the cup with? Water. So there's a cup of water on the table in honor of Miriam and all of the great women throughout our history. You can put a square peg in a round hole, that's fine. The reason is this is the matzah we're going to eat all week, no problem. This is our bread. You make a sandwich, this is what it's going to be on. But the night of the Seder, we use a special matzah that is round, and it's called shmura matzah, which comes from the Hebrew word shomer, to guard. And it just means that that batch was processed where every step of the way a rabbi was observing and making sure that it didn't come into contact with any moisture whatsoever. We're talking about from the field when it's picked. The wheat was picked, it was ground, there's supervision the entire way, nothing is automated, everything done by hand. It's stored and then it's cooked, and what you get is a round, kind of burnt-ish cracker. And that's what people like to have at the Seder, the most authentic throwback to what our ancestors ate, where this is made by a machine in upstate New York. If it's the Strites company, it used to be made in Brooklyn. They had a factory on Rivington Street. Strites had the most amazing factory. They had like 3 tenements that were next to each other that didn't even line up vertically. So they had an assembly line that had to go at an angle to go in and out the windows of these buildings. And it was a totally inadequate place for them to do it, but it was 100 years of history. A couple of years back, they moved to Orangeburg, New York, just a little bit upstate, and built a modern facility. And that old factory, a little shtetl in the corner in Manhattan, it's now really expensive condos. 150 Rivington, if you ever want to look it up. You see it's like $3.2 million for a 1-bedroom. Don't pass over anyone. Thanks, Em. I'm here all week.
Why don't you just give me a piece of whatever you got?
Yeah, we'll share. Yeah, I put cheese on it. It's like a cheese one.
So what are some of the things we put on this? What would go good on a matzah? Butter, cream cheese. Dessert. There you go. Excellent choice. Like macaron? Chocolate chip.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Of course.
Awesome.
It's the best part. It's the Manischewitz from Costco.
Thank you.
It's great. We had Manischewitz.
Some people actually are partial to a brand, but I don't understand why it's the same. Oh, you like that? That this is a tough holiday to be a vegan. All right, to be vegan. So vegan, by definition, means they don't like to eat anything that's animal sourced. That means not just animal products like meats, but also no dairy, no eggs. If you eliminate those things, a whole bunch of our foods go away. So it's matzah or nothing. The problem is protein sources for vegans this time of year. And why is that? Because there is a second tier of kosher for Passover. There's a selection of foods in Hebrew called kitniot. And what they are things that could be confused with food you're not allowed to have on the holiday. There's nothing wrong with the food, but because people could mix it up or mix it in with other things, about 800 years ago, the rabbis of Europe said we should stop eating that. What's in that group? Well, first let's talk about what is okay and what is not okay on Passover. This matzah is made from wheat flour. Wheat is one of the 5 grains that you have to be careful with. Wheat, oats, barley, spelt, and rye. Those 5 things are the things we avoid on Passover, but also they're the only 5 things that can be made into matzah. Over at Fresh Market, right down the street from you here, they were carrying ancient grains matzah made from spelt. So that is a thing. I've seen rye matzah, and I think I've seen oat matzah. The one you'll never see is barley because nobody wants it. It's cheap, it doesn't taste great. Yes, sir?
Yeah, Cousin Charlie told me that the original matzahs, his rabbi told him, was made from millet, an ancient cereal that's still grown in Africa, Asia, and in the Middle East.
I haven't heard that one, but I know barley was one that they said that the slaves were given. And the Karaite Jews, there's about 50,000 of them in the world, they like to try to make barley matzah.
Rabbi's version.
Okay.
My daughter, Heidi, bought me a box of expensive whole wheat matzahs.
Yes, you can get that. If you add anything to the
I
matzah,
have them in
you
my
can't use it
room.
for your seder. They make onion matzah, everything matzah. You get the kind of bagel kind of thing. But for the seder, it's flour and water, and the flour can only be from those 5 sources. But anything else made from those 5 grains is a no-no on Passover. So we switched to potato flour, tapioca flour. The kidneyot were things that you could grind up, and when you grind them up, they look like wheat flour. So people 800 years ago couldn't read. And if you had a bag of white flour that came from, say, corn or rice or beans over here, and you had a white wheat flour over here, you couldn't tell the difference because you couldn't read the label. Also, where did people buy their food? In the marketplace, from a big barrel on a windy day. The wheat could blow right into the rice and kind of cross-contamination. So the rabbi said, half the rabbis said, to be safe, we're going to put all of this on the no-no list. Nothing that can be ground up into a white flour. So off the menu, rice, corn, peas, virtually all beans, no peanuts, no absolutely nuts cleaning their homes. In fact, even says on Wikipedia, if you enjoy spring cleaning, thank the Jews, we invented it. We did. Passover happens in the spring every year, and in order to remove any trace of this leavening that we have in our homes, you'll see people take a blowtorch to their stainless steel appliances to get them red hot and burn off any food residue, to pull out the dishwasher, the oven, clean behind that fridge that they haven't looked in a million years, and whatever they can't make kosher and make clean, they cover with aluminum foil so that the food you use on Passover will never touch the counter that you use the rest of the year. We go absolutely crazy with this one. So there has to be complete absence of this stuff for the full week. At the end of the holiday, one of the things the Sephardim do that is always something we talk about is they break Passover in a spectacular way. On the 8th night, when it gets dark, the holiday is now over and food is now allowed to you with the usual rules. You can have bread, you can have cakes. They have a feast called Memuna. And if you've heard of this, North Africa, Spanish communities, it's basically a giant potluck with everyone in the neighborhood bringing over all the stuff you couldn't eat during the week. Which begs the question, where were they hiding it? Passover literally ended minutes ago. Where are you getting cake and cookies from? Amazon, right?
That's right.
Instant delivery. No, so there's another interesting part of the holiday. In addition to not eating any of that stuff, you're not supposed to own it. You're supposed to purge your home of all those cookies and cakes and leavened things, which could be really wasteful. Could you imagine going through your pantry and having to throw out or donate most of your food? That's not good. What if you're not a person of means? How are you going to afford food for Passover? And then after Passover, you have to restock your entire house. That would be very prohibitively expensive. Interestingly enough, the origin for this part of the story comes from the Middle Ages and the beer making industry. One of the things the church let the Jews do, because we were restricted in certain occupations, they didn't mind if the Jews were the beer brewers because that was kind of an unholy thing, so we'll let them do it. That's fine. Money was to be made. People wanted beer. But beer is very much not kosher for Passover. What's its main ingredients are barley and hops, and all these grains that we're not supposed to have. The beer is no good. The raw ingredients have to go. The owners of the beer breweries would go to the rabbis and say, guys, we'll go out of business. If we have to shut down, we have to destroy all of our stock, all of our raw materials. We have to start from scratch. We can't do that. You can't take away my livelihood. There has to be a better way. Think of something. So the rabbis thought of something. They went back over the law, they pored over the volumes, and they said, it says here that you can't own it. Well, what if you didn't own it? What if we sold the beer factory to a not Jewish person for a week? So they would go to the mayor of the town. They would usually get a prominent citizen, have a big elaborate ceremony, they have a contract that says, I hereby sell to you. And then they would do something like, well, what's the price? Oh, we'll talk about the price after the holiday. But here's the keys. You own the place. And the factory would still be shut for the week, but they wouldn't have to throw out the beer or any of the grains because a non-Jew owned it. I don't own it. After the holiday, they go back to the mayor and say, all right, let's talk about that price. How's $10 million sound? What? No, I can't afford $10 million. Well, then the contract's null and void.